In some ways, it could be argued that it's really not fair for me to talk about what I'm going to talk about today. The truth of the matter is, I watch what I say. In fact, I always have to watch what I say. In fact, I wish I could tell you a story, and maybe I will on my last Sunday as your pastor, about how I learned the importance of watching what I say. And I learned that when I was a very young man. But some might argue that the reason I watch what I say is because of my work. And they would say, therefore, that that's not the same as the rest of the world. Well, I'll say that's true, but that's also not true. I do watch what I say because I'm a pastor. I'm sure that I don't do this perfectly, but I try not to say or write anything that would in any way embarrass you or embarrass the Lord, or anything that I would say or write. I don't want that to be embarrassing if it would happen to show up on the screens here at church. So it's true that I watch what I say because I'm a pastor, but let me be clear. I watch what I say because I'm a Christian. I make my living with words, so you may not feel like the playing field is level for me to talk about how we use our words, but I think it is. And one reason I think that is the case is because we all know what is positive speech, that is, speech that would honor Jesus, and we all know about speech that would not be honoring to Him. We know that words have meanings, and they have various usages, and they even, in fact, change over time, which ought to cause us to be even more cautious with the words that we utilize. I'm down with that. Used to mean you had the flu. When I was a kid, had I used the word queer, my dad would have whipped me worse than the Cardinals did the Cubs last week. And now, that's a label that we're being asked to use to identify a certain group of people in our culture. At any rate, we know that some words are used in helpful ways, and some words are used for the purpose of being negative or hurtful toward people. I'm saying that when you say to someone, I think you're ugly and your mother dresses you funny, you know that's not nice, right? As we will see from the biblical text this morning, our words have power. We bless and we curse people, and if we belong to Jesus, we know which of those two ought to be proper. Some of us have been blessed by the words of others. When someone says, good job, or I appreciate you, or that was so nice, or those beautiful words that we hear, I love you. We know how much of a blessing those are to our lives. But if you've been called fat, or stupid, or racist, or ugly, or arrogant, you know those words are hurtful. My point this morning is to deal with how we speak, generally speaking, that is, as well as how we speak via social media. I'm not going to name all the platforms, but whether we're talking about Facebook or Twitter, etc., the rules of engagement ought to be at least somewhat the same as when we speak to people on the phone or when we talk to them face to face. So the point is, all of this applies to how we communicate. I'm sure that we've all had the wonderful experience of having someone blast us, drag our name, our views, or our faith through the mud, all from behind the safety and security and sometimes anonymity of a personal computer keyboard. In fact, you know as well as I do, some people will say things from that vantage point, that is behind a keyboard, that they would never say to someone's face. There are lots of reasons for that, not really any good ones, and that's out of the purview for this morning. So this morning we continue Elephants in the Room, what our words say about us, social media, and how we speak. James chapter 3, verses 1 through 12. It's page 1012 in the Bibles there in front of you, and I'll invite you to stand as we read together this sacred text. James chapter 3, beginning at verse 1, where James, the brother of the Lord Jesus, writes as follows. Not many of you should become teachers, my brothers, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness. For we all stumble in many ways, and if anyone does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle his whole body. If we put bits into the mouths of horses so that they obey us, we guide their whole bodies as well. Look at the ships also. Though they are so large and are driven by strong winds, they are guided by a very small rudder wherever the will of the pilot directs. So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great things. How great a forest is set ablaze by such a small fire. And the tongue is a fire, a world of unrighteousness. The tongue is set among our members, staining the whole body, setting on fire the entire course of life, and set on fire by hell. For every kind of beast and bird and reptile and sea creature can be tamed and has been tamed by mankind, but no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil, full of deadly poison. With it we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse people who are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing. My brothers, these things ought not to be so. Does a spring pour forth from the same opening both fresh and salt water? Can a fig tree, my brother, bear olives, or a grapevine produce figs? Neither can a salt pond yield fresh water. Thank you so much. You may be seated. What our words say about us, social media, and how we speak. You know, since January, we've been talking about things that nobody really wants to talk about, but somebody needs to talk about. So far in our series, we've talked about the authority of the Bible, and we discussed the sanctity of life. We talked about the sanctity of marriage. We talked about marriage and singleness. We talked about so-called gay marriage, divorce, remarriage, cohabitation, gambling, depression, suicide. We talked about the resurrection, heaven and hell, homosexuality, racism, sexism, gender bending, money and giving. And then we talked about the discipline that comes from God. And we spent a couple of weeks talking about the discipline that comes from the local church. So remaining on the list of our subjects are the following: burial versus cremation, capital punishment, gluttony, pornography, immigration, dating, alcohol, marijuana, creation and evolution, and the issue of eternal security. What does once saved, always saved actually mean, and what it really doesn't mean? And then just last week, someone asked me a question that I thought would most certainly be worth mentioning at some point in our series, but I'm not going to tell you this morning, so you have to come back. You might wonder why how we speak is a topic for discussion in this particular series. Well, I'm glad you asked. First of all, it's important because we are in the midst of raising generations that do not know how to simply talk with one another. They'll text, tweet, Snapchat, Messenger, use Instagram. They'll use apps such as TikTok, Tumblr, WhatsApp, Discord, House Party, Live Me, Whisper, Monkey, Meet Me, Omegle, and one called Yubo or Yubbo, I don't know, formerly Yellow, which is often called the Tinder for teens. And all you need to know is that's not a good thing. But there are other reasons for us to talk about how we talk utilizing social media. Sometimes we Christians don't understand that people connect what we say to what we believe. If a pagan, for example, is blasting a politician on social media, everybody says, well, that's business as usual, right? But if a Christian says something derogatory about someone on social media, mark it down, brothers and sisters. It is a reflection of our faith, our family, our local church, our denomination, and most importantly, Jesus Himself. Let that sink in. Now, please don't hear me saying that we Christians should be mute. We have opinions. In fact, my opinions are better than yours. But the reality is they ought to be sanctified opinions. They ought to be informed opinions. So I'm telling you, we can speak. I just think we ought to be careful how we speak. It should not go unnoticed that God spoke and the world became. And God said, let there be light, and there was light. With just a word, God brings the universe to life. Our words differently, but our words too have some life-giving power. We build people up or we tear people down with our words. Remember what Jesus said about words? He said, for out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Would you say that with me? For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So let's talk about our words and what they say about us. And in the process, we'll talk about social media and how we speak. And the truth of the matter is, I can't talk about all of this without talking a bit about politics as well, because so much about social media is politically driven. Just ask the Russians, they'll tell you. You guys okay? 9:30 was a whole lot better. I debated the title. I wanted to call this "Be Careful, Little Mouth, What You Say," and "Be Careful, Little Hands, What You Type." And I had about 20 other titles in mind, but we have a deadline for the bulletin, so you're stuck with this one. Let's dig in. Number one, our words speak volumes about our proclivity to stumble. Our words speak volumes about our proclivity to stumble. Look with me again at chapter 3, verses 1 and 2. Not many of you should become teachers, my brothers, for you know that we who teach will be judged with greater strictness. Let me stop, because you've all read that, and I just want to say this. James really means this. This is important. For we all stumble in many ways, and if one does not stumble in what he says, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle his whole body. Our words speak volumes about our proclivity to stumble. It's a reality that people stumble. In fact, we would all say, nobody's perfect. Do you ever put your foot in your mouth? Yeah, don't lie in church. There's a reason that phrase is so popular, because that practice is so common. One of the greatest things that we can teach and model is the importance of choosing words carefully, or carefully choosing words, depending on who your English teacher happened to be. The point is, throughout life, we learn that words are a big deal. And one of the things that we need to underscore is that our words far too often remind us of our own personal proclivity toward, our tendency toward stumbling. When someone drops the F-bomb on a television interview, do you know why that happens? It happens because they're comfortable dropping the F-bomb in everyday life. Jesus said, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. He said that, right? Thank you. So listen, this is convicting not just about that particular word, but about a lot of words and a lot of phrases and a lot of paragraphs and even thoughts that we have that we may never utter. The reason someone drops the F-bomb is because their heart is filled with F-bombs. That's also true for sexually charged innuendo and sexist comments or racial slurs, or a phrase meant to denigrate someone else in any way. We could go home now, because that's a sermon in itself. And frankly, it's convicting as I search my own heart and consider things that I have thought and things that I have said, and we all know I'm a whole lot better than the rest of you guys. If you're a visitor, if you're a guest, to ask somebody, they'll explain it. The context, of course, for James' remarks has to do with the responsibility of those who teach. They need to be sure that they teach things that are not false. And those who teach spiritual truths face a stricter judgment. The stumbling that he alludes to is related to the spiritual things that one who teaches something, spiritual things that might not be right, or perhaps not exactly right, or perhaps completely wrong, and how those things that are taught by someone who is to teach spiritual truths might cause a follower of Jesus, or maybe someone who is not yet a follower of Jesus, it might cause them to stumble. And James says this is a big deal and it matters. Teachers of spiritual truth exercise caution with words and actions because of influence and accountability. There were some in the early church who sought to be teachers because of the status. Teachers were held in high regard, in high esteem. So you know as well as I do that teaching spiritual truth is an awesome responsibility. The older I get, the more I realize how much more there is to learn. And I know that every preaching and teaching engagement is an awesome responsibility that demands my best self, my best preparation, my best delivery, my best heart. and my best commitment. Teachers of spiritual truths are held to a higher standard and level of accountability. There are a lot of things that I don't do, a lot of things that I wouldn't even consider doing or wouldn't say simply because I'm a Bible teacher. And I'm talking about things that wouldn't necessarily be inherently wrong. I willingly accept this responsibility. I don't want anything that I would say or anything that I would do in any way to trample on the message. We ask those in teaching positions in our church to sign a teacher's covenant, not because we're legalistic, but we do that to protect them. We want them to realize it is a big spiritual obligation for which they will one day give an account. So I don't think, though, it's a stretch for this application to recognize that for all of us as followers of Jesus, the world is judging us strictly too. And the truth of the matter is, sometimes we cause them to stumble because our words don't match what we purport to believe. So, our words speak volumes about our proclivity to stumble. Secondly, our words speak volumes about our proclivity toward pride. Verses 3 through 5 back in our text. If we put bits into the mouths of horses so that they obey us, we guide their whole bodies as well. Look at the ships also. Though they are so large and are driven by strong winds, they are guided by a very small rudder wherever the will of the pilot decrees. So also the tongue is a small member, yet it boasts of great things. How great a forest is set ablaze by such a small fire. Our words speak volumes about our proclivity toward pride. We know that small things exert large influence. A bit in a horse's mouth gives direction to the horse. A rudder of a ship is very small, but it can steer a rather large ship. A small fire can ignite a huge forest. An atom is a very small thing, but think of the inherent power that it possesses. Currency in America is not very big, but think of the power money has to cause people to do good or to do evil. A $1,000 bill or a check is only about 6 inches in length and maybe 2.5 inches in width. And think of all the things people will do for money. What we say speaks volumes about whom or what controls us. The tongue, James says, and mark this down, the tongue is evil. It is not merely passive, but it is active. And James reminds us it is, in fact, on the attack. It is a deadly poison that can be used for evil, or it can be used to help bring healing. There's a reason, by the way, for the limits of free speech. Now, I know a lot of people don't understand this, and they think that in America you can always say whatever you want to say, wherever you are, etc. I know people don't see it this way, but the Constitution of the United States, as I understand it, does not give you the freedom to say just anything you want to say in any context. You may not know this, but I'm a grandfather. I have 3 grandchildren. They're named Ryan, and then we have Hudson and Jack. And the truth of the matter is, if we could fast forward, if they get a little bit older, and if I were to pick them up at the airport and they came running, I can say, "Hi, Ryan," and I can say, "Hi, Hudson," but they don't want you to say, "Hi, Jack," at an airport. You can't just say whatever you want to. And as we think about the tongue, the truth of the matter is it quickly reveals our level of pride. Don't you have to fight to hold your tongue sometimes? I'm the only one? Come on, don't lie in church. I've told you guys this before, but Lori has said often, "I wish I had your wit." And I say, "No, you don't." It's a curse, man. It is. You don't know the battle that I go through. You don't. You don't know. It's a battle not to cut with the tongue, especially when someone cuts me first. Let me give you an example. Knowing I'm about to be rebuked, Someone says, I just have a little thought that I want to share with you. My first thought in response is, good thing you said little, at least you recognize your limitations. Someone says, I want to get something off my chest. My first thought is, why not? You've already removed your heart. I haven't said that to anybody here, have I? Someone says, I have half a mind to really tell you off. And I think, be careful, remember you only started with about half. All of that, for you and for me. You know what the issue is? It's pride. It's pride. So our words speak volumes about our proclivity to stumble and about our proclivity toward pride. Thirdly, our words speak volumes about our proclivity toward all kinds of sin. Look with me at verse 6 in our text and following. And the tongue is a fire, a world of unrighteousness. The tongue is set among our members, staining the whole body, setting on fire the entire course of life, and set on fire by hell. I kind of want to stop and say, James, tell us how you really think. For every kind of beast and bird, of reptile and sea creature can be tamed and has been tamed by mankind, but no human being can tame the tongue. It is a restless evil, full of deadly poison. With it we bless our Lord and Father, and with it we curse people who are made in the likeness of God. From the same mouth come blessing and cursing. My brothers, these things ought not to be so. Our words speak volumes about our proclivity toward all kinds of sin. The tongue expresses the sinfulness of the world. Verse 8 reminds us that the tongue is a restless evil. How often we hear words from people's lips that simply express the sinfulness that is rampant in our world. And lest I come across as more self-righteous than I really am, it's not just you that need that reminder, it's me. We all need this reminder. That is not for the outside world, that's for me. I've told you guys through the years a lot of Larry Brandt stories. He was my best friend growing up. Think about the show The Wonder Years. That was our time growing up. He's now a chaplain in the United States Navy. He has rank. I don't. He reminds me of that often. But the truth is, I am so proud of Larry that if I had a brother, I couldn't love a brother more than I love my friend Larry. But when we were kids, I did what most kids did. When I wanted to do something and my parents didn't want me to do it, I'd say, but Larry got to do it. And my parents would swiftly remind me in ways that were quite memorable that I wasn't Larry. And then if I did the thing I wasn't supposed to do, they would say, you know better. And they were right. Listen, if you're not a Christian, I think you would do well to try to clean up your act, and you'd probably make the world a little better place if you were kind and nice and you didn't cuss and all that sort of thing. But the truth of the matter is, you're not my responsibility. You're not. But the people of this church, at least to some extent, are. Sometimes I scroll through Facebook because it's only my body that snaps and my mouth that chats, and my memory loss is Insta and a gram is a cracker. And at my age, when someone says they're tweeting, I'm concerned it's a medical problem. So when I'm on Facebook and I read some Christian bashing someone else, or I read the words that someone has typed that I know they would not have said if they were present with a group of people, and instead of just taking one on the chin for the Christian team, they lash out with all kinds of ugly against an unbeliever. And by the way, an unbeliever is acting in ways that are very natural for him. Non-Christians act like non-Christians. It's the way that it is. When I see that, I want to say what my mom used to say, you know better. Now, I'm not saying that you shouldn't share what you think or what you believe or what you feel, although I think a lot of Facebook posts and tweets would be better utilized if they were face-to-face dialogue. My point is, be careful. And you may or may not know this, but a whole lot of people don't change their mind based on Facebook posts. If you're going to engage with people on social media, here's what I'm going to tell you to do. You need to imagine that just under your post, you have signed your name, you told where you go to church, when you came to faith in Christ, you give your personal address and your mother's phone number. And then imagine every post that you've made showing up on the screen Sunday morning. We've got a few right now, as a matter of fact. Listen, I know they're doing it, but you're not them. If you belong to Jesus, you are different than the rest. Like my parents would tell me when I did something that Larry did, they would say, you know better. I think you should still engage people, but man, be winsome about it. One of my atheist friends posted on Facebook just the other day. He shared a picture of a great fish and a character meant to be Jonah, and the post reads as follows: science from the Bible. Jonah lived in the stomach of a large fish for 3 days and nights and survived. Jonah 1:17. And then it said, fact, no human being could survive in the stomach of a large fish, as there would be methane gas and a total lack of oxygen within the stomach. Now, I could let that make me mad, because my buddy is always yanking my chain about being a follower of Jesus. He sent me a message just this past week, as a matter of fact. He said, I'm now caught up with your Elephants in the Room series. He watches everyone. He'll watch this and he'll text me about it. He will. But I could let that make me mad. But my friend, who is an unbeliever, is acting naturally. If you don't believe in God, you live in opposition to God. It's the way it works. So he's just doing what comes naturally, and he yanks my chain all the time for being a Christian. Now, I know for some people, they would have read this stuff on Facebook, and they would have posted it back, you go to Gehenna. Now, for those of you that are not New Testament scholars, ask your friends. I do believe that those without Christ go to hell. I believe that. Our church believes that. But that's not a good response at this point. My friend and I have talked, by the way, about hell before and without angst or anger. So in response to this, what do you suppose I said, just by way of illustration? I said, man, I'm glad nobody told God this, wink, wink. You see the difference? I was pushing back. I wasn't being ugly about it. I love my atheist friend. I love my gay friends too. So I post things that are true. I tell them the truth. I just don't want to be ugly about it. We even put my sermons on the web, and in a recent sermon about homosexuality, a gay friend of mine posted something about that. I'm not out to bash atheists or gay people or anybody else. I don't want to say anything that in any way will trample the message of Jesus that I'm spending my life trying to convey. Why would I do that? And listen to me, why would you do that? Listen, the place this shows up the worst is when we talk about politics. I don't want to waste whatever influence I have trying to convince somebody else of my political persuasion, although they're much better than the rest of the world's. And I sure don't want to do that on Facebook. Listen to me, I have prayed for every president that's been elected during my adult life. I've prayed for all of them. And the truth is, just like you, some of them I have liked, and some of them, frankly, I haven't. But in case you haven't figured this out, President Obama could not bring hope and change. And President Trump can't make America great again. Only God can do that. So our words speak volume. Everybody offended now? Good, I've done my job. So our words speak volumes about our proclivity to stumble. Our words speak volumes about our proclivity toward pride. Our words speak volumes about our proclivity toward all kinds of sin. I've got to hurry, or else you'll say something bad about me, and that would demonstrate you haven't heard a word I've said. So fourthly and finally, our words speak volumes about our proclivity toward inconsistency, verses 11 and 12 back in the text. Does a spring pour forth from the same opening both fresh and salt water? Can a fig tree, my brothers, bear olives, or a grapevine produce figs? Neither can a salt pond yield fresh water. You don't know this, but James just told you off. He said, can an oak tree bear apples? Stupid! Our words speak volumes about our proclivity toward inconsistency. James is talking about being consistent. He's saying it's not consistent to say that we love Jesus and then spew hateful words on His creation. Listen to me carefully. You cannot tell your kids or grandkids a beautiful Bible story and then tuck them in at night and then wake them up screaming your head off at them the next morning. They don't know which message to believe, but listen to me, they will remember the screaming long after the Bible story is forgotten. Consistency. And the truth is, we have a predisposition to the opposite, don't we? We tend to do the wrong thing. Think how silly we are. Can we talk? We're a silly bunch. We come to church and we talk about how much we love Jesus and humankind, and we want the world to get to know Jesus. And then on our way to lunch, someone turns into our lane, and given the chance, we run over them. Because we own I-35. And just as we did, they'd look up and see the Jesus fish on our bumper. That's why I don't have that thing on my car, man. And my wife will never have one on her car. I can guaranteed. We're prone to being inconsistent, aren't we? Many of you know the words to the great old hymn that says, "Come thou fount of every blessing, tune my heart to sing thy grace. Streams of mercy never ceasing, call for songs of loudest praise. Teach me some melodious sonnet, sung by flaming tongues above. Praise the mount, I'm fixed upon it, mount of thy redeeming love." And then you remember that verse that says, prone to wonder. Lord, I feel it, prone to leave the God I love. Here's my heart, Lord, take and seal it for thy courts above. A man named Robert Robinson wrote that hymn in 1758, but what a lot of people don't know is that it wasn't long after he wrote that hymn that he departed from the faith about which he had written. It wasn't that he no longer believed. As I understand it, he believed in the doctrine, but his own failure and his own sin caused him to lose his belief that God could love him. Years later, on a summer evening, he was riding in a carriage with a lady friend, and they rode past a church and heard the strains of that hymn that Robinson had written so many years before, and he began to cry. And his friend asked the reason for his tears, and he told her that the hymn was his. And then he said, "I would give everything I own to know the peace I knew when I wrote that hymn." I can't help but wonder sometimes how many people there are that might feel like Robert Robinson, longing for a peace they used to have, dwelling on their sins and their shortcomings, wondering if God could really love them. We're prone to wonder, after all. The truth is, Robert Robinson could have written this fourth point. He understood. Truth is, so do you. The question is, what are you going to do about it?